Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take the sources you send us, dig into them, and pull out the key insights. Basically, a shortcut to getting informed.
And today, we're looking at something pretty heavy. How the rule of law completely breaks down inside a dictatorship.
Exactly. We're doing this through the eyes, the experiences of a former high court judge from Eritrea.
Yeah, our main source is an interview with him, Habtib Yamani, from swissinfo.ch. And we've got some extra notes, too, just for context.
Right. So our mission here is to really get a handle on how a dictatorship can just operate outside the law.
What that means for people caught in the system.
Yeah, the impact.
Yeah.
And, why the rule of law is so fundamental. It's a stark lesson, really. Okay, let's start with Habtib Yaman himself, his early days.
Well, what's really striking is how optimistic he was at the beginning. This was early days Eritrea, just got independence.
Right. A hopeful time.
Totally. He was actually in the first law school graduating class back in '93, and his whole goal, like many others then, was to build a Rechtsstaat.
A state governed by law.
Exactly. He studied criminal law, constitutional law, human rights, thought he could use that to build a better country. He even mentioned having lecturers from the U.S. probably reinforce those ideals,
Sounds full of promise. But, well, things didn't quite pan out that way. That 1997 Eritrean constitution?
Yeah.
It's key here, isn't it? It's supposed to be the foundation, but...
But it never happened. That's the crucial bit. It was drafted, apparently had some good articles, according to Yaman himself, including this oath judges were supposed to take, swearing to uphold it, the Constitution, administer justice according to it, without bias or gain.
Okay, sounds standard.
But here's the thing. Yaman and the other judges, they never took that oath. They were only ever appointed provisionally.
Provisionally. That word keeps coming up. It wasn't just like a temporary thing while they figured stuff out.
No. It became the method. The regime, under Isaias Afwerki, it uses this constant state of provisionality to maintain control.
How?
Well, if everything's provisional, nothing's permanent. There's no stable legal framework. The government can basically do what it wants whenever it wants.
So it keeps everyone, especially judges, kind of off balance.
Yeah.
Insecure.
Precisely. It wasn't just some administrative detail. It looks like a deliberate strategy. Keep the judiciary weak, dependent, unable to challenge the regime.
And Yamani lived this for, 16 years? As a provisional judge?
16 years. Imagine. It means zero job security, zero protection from political influence.
Must make impartial justice pretty much impossible.
Absolutely. And there wasn't even a clear process for dealing with judges who might step out of line, which just undermined independence even more. You can't rule fairly if your job hangs by a thread, depending on who you please or displease.
So with all these limitations, what cases could he actually handle? Was there a line?
Oh, yeah, there's definitely a line. And it's quite telling. He was a high court judge, right? But mostly, he dealt with cases where the government didn't really have a dog in the fight.
Like what?
Things like inheritance disputes, divorces, assault cases, even murder. Apparently, they used old Ethiopian criminal law for those.
Okay, so personal stuff, crime.
Yeah. But the second the government's interests were involved, the court had zero power. Nothing.
Who did them?
The military. Yaman said it himself. The military had the ultimate authority.
Stark. And it wasn't just about the types of cases. The article mentions specific examples of this lack of rule of law affecting people, right?
Right.
Especially critics like journalists or politicians who fell out of favor.
Oh, absolutely. Those examples are really disturbing. And yes, they tie directly into that silencing of dissent, like lawyers defending someone against a person with connections. They could just get arrested.
Just arrested?
Yes.
For doing their job.
Seems like it. Or even worse, people who filed lawsuits against someone connected to the regime, maybe journalists digging too deep, or politicians like the G15 group who questioned the president, they could just disappear.
Disappear.
Vanish. It created this intense climate of fear. You wouldn't dare challenge the government legally if that was the potential outcome.
And Yamani saw this up close with his own friends, didn't he? The journalists arrested in 2001. That story really highlights the personal nature of power there.
It really does. That newspaper had a huge circulation, 40,000, clearly seen as a threat. And like the G15 politicians who also got rounded up around then, they dared to question things.
So what happened when Yaman tried to help his friends?
He tried, maybe thinking there was some legal avenue. But the police chief just shut him down, told him flat out, they are the president's prisoners.
Wow.
And warned Yamani not to interfere. It just shows, doesn't it? Justice wasn't about law. It was about the president's personal whim. Same fate for the G15 arrested, disappeared, no due process, power acting completely outside the law.
A system where law is just irrelevant if it gets in the way of power.
Yeah.
And there's this whole national service system. That sounds like another key part of maintaining control.
Yeah, it's huge. Described as this indefinite militarized service that basically organizes everyone's life.
Indefinite. You mean it doesn't end?
Not really, no set term. And critically, the UN, there was a big report in 2016 documented just horrific, widespread human rights abuses connected to it.
Like what?
Things happening in military training camps, detention centers, potential crimes against humanity.
And no way to seek justice for that.
Well, think about it. With the judiciary completely non-independent, as we've discussed, there's basically zero accountability. It just adds to that whole system of control and fear.
It's overwhelming. So after seeing all this, Yamani eventually fled, went to Switzerland in 2017.
He did. And his experience there with Swiss democracy sounds like it was a real shock to the system in a good way.
What stood out to him?
It's almost mundane but powerful. He said getting the local village budget in the mail was a revelation.
Just the village budget.
Yeah. Because in Eritrea, he says, basically only the president and the economic minister know anything about national finances. Complete lack of transparency. So seeing how even local information empowers citizens in a democracy, that was eye-opening for him.
Makes sense. A world away. But even now, in exile, he's still advocating for change in Eritrea. That can't be easy, though, this idea of transnational oppression.
No, it's definitely not easy, and it's a real danger. He's working with other Eritreans in the diaspora, trying to develop ideas for a democratic future, one with rule of law.
But the regime reaches beyond its borders.
Oh, yes. That's transnational repression. The Eritrean regime actively tries to silence, intimidate, and monitor refugees abroad, including in places like Switzerland. It restricts their freedom of speech, makes activism risky.
That's chilling, that the reach extends so far. The article mentions Swiss police looking more closely at some Eritrean cultural festivals.
Yeah, that seems to be happening. Authorities are maybe getting wise to the fact that these events, organized by government supporters, can be used for propaganda, pressure, even spying on the diaspora.
So some awareness is growing.
Seems so, but Yamani, ultimately, he says he feels some safety from public opinion in Switzerland, and he's keeping up the work, pushing for that future ruled by law in Eritrea.
So wrapping this up,
Yeah.
what's the main takeaway here from Habtiab Yamani's whole story?
I think fundamentally it's about how fragile these legal systems can be. When the political will isn't there to uphold the rule of law, it can just crumble.
Yeah.
Yamani's experience is just such a powerful personal look at how a dictatorship dismantles justice piece by piece. That deliberate uncertainty, the courts being powerless, suppressing rights, it creates this environment of just pervasive fear.
Really is sobering. And it makes you think, if it can be undermined so thoroughly there, how careful do we need to be, even in societies that seem stable, seem governed by law?
That's the critical question, isn't it? It forces you, the listener, to consider how might power operate outside the legal lines, even subtly, in places we think are safe, and what do we actually need to do constantly to protect the rule of law, to make sure it stays that solid foundation for everyone, something to really mull over.